Lesson 3 discusses Chapter 3 of the International Mechanical Code. Now, Chapter 3 is a special chapter with regard to the rest of the code book. Chapter 3 is entitled General Regulations, and it starts off with a section 301, which is general scope. It talks about the labeling, talks about testing, talks about a lot of other aspects to the code which everything else will build on. Chapter 3 is, you could consider, your base of the code. You will also see as it goes through, for example, in section 301.7, it will refer you to international electrical codes. For some of this, it will refer you to international plumbing code as well. It talks about seismic resistance, which talks about international building code. So you're going to see a lot of reference in here as it discusses other codes as well. When you see a reference to another code, International Mechanical Code Council is saying, go ahead and go to that other code. That is what we are going to use as our standards, in addition to anything that's in this book. Section 302 all has to do with the protection of the structure. It's going to talk about penetrations. It's going to talk about whether or not you can cut and notch wood framing. It's going to talk about how far you can cut into notching, and it's going to talk about how many holes you can bore, or the size of hole with respect to the stud you're putting it through. You have to be very careful here with bored holes, and this is something that does show up on state licensing exams, is that a bored hole cannot be greater than 60% of the depth of the stud. In other words, we cannot go over 60%. Okay, alterations to trusses are all talked, notching and cutting of steel framing. So that's all considered when you go through here. Section 303 talks about equipment and appliance locations. There are a few prohibited locations. For example, you can't put appliances in sleeping rooms, in other words, bedrooms. You can't put them in bathrooms, toilet rooms, storage closet, and surgical rooms, with the exception of direct vented appliances that obtain all combustion air from the outside, solid fuel appliances, provided the room is not a combined space, and appliances installed in a dedicated enclosure, and again, where the air is taken directly from outside. You have to make sure that appliances and equipment are protected from damage according to 303.4, and there are several indoor and outdoor locations as well as pit locations. Be very careful about installing things in the base of elevator shafts. That's not allowed. Has to do with fire movement. An elevator shaft is a primary way for fire to move through a building. Section 304 talks about the installation of appliances, where it's allowed to be installed, elevation of ignition sources above floors. For example, one that frequently shows up on code exams is the motor fuel dispensing devices or any place hazardous locations. The ignition cannot be less than 18 inches. In other words, the burners cannot be less than 18 inches above the floor because of pooling of fuel gases. Parking garages. So be very aware of the Section 304 codes. It tells you where and when and the clearances required around appliances. Section 305 is another extremely important one for HVAC techs, as well as plumbers and anyone else dealing with installing pipe. It tells you all about piping support, where you can install it, how you have to install it, and the materials that support the pipe. It refers frequently to Table 305.4, which tells you the maximum and minimum spacing for vertical hangers based on different size pipes. For example, ABS pipe, which is a plastic piping. Horizontal spacing has to be within 4 feet maximum, and if the pipe's running vertically up and down, it's 10 feet. Copper is a little bit different. Copper pipe, you can go to 12 feet horizontal and 10 feet vertical. Copper tubing changes. It gets smaller again because it will break. It's easier, it will sag. 6 feet on the horizontal and 10 feet on vertical. So again, all has to do with supporting the equipment. Section 306 talks about access and service spaces. We need to make sure we have enough room to work around the appliances. We have to make sure we can get over it in the attics, especially for new construction. Much appliances are going into the attics. Electrical requirements. okay, are all talked about. Then section 307 talks about condensate disposal. Where are we going to run the drains for the water coming out of equipment? Very important in heating appliances as well as cooling appliances. Okay, talks about that you can't be restricting it. Drain pipe materials, it tells you exactly what pipes you can use, and it tells you where they need to be run. Now, it very specifically says an auxiliary drain pan with a separate drain needs to be provided under the coils in which condensate will occur. It discharges to a point of disposal where the occupants can see it. It cannot discharge directly into a sewer pipe. Very important, especially in attics, know where your condensate is going. Water level monitoring devices sometimes are required depending on where the unit's installed in. Section 308 talks about clearance reduction. How can you reduce the clearance requirements? Can we put it in a smaller space, leaving less room? The table here talks about what you can do to reduce the clearance requirements. And again, if you look at it, it makes sense. It all has to do with prevention of fire, preventing the spread of fire with solid fuel burning appliances, temperature controls. Temperature control is also in section 309. What are the requirements for a heating system when it's installed? Space heating systems intended for human occupancy shall be provided with active or passive space heating systems capable of maintaining a minimum indoor air temperature of 68 degrees at a point 3 foot above the floor on a design heating day. And if you take a look back at the definitions in Chapter 2, you'll find a design heating day is what we base our load calculations. It's how we establish what size equipment we need. For example, in the area where I'm at, my design heating day is a 5-degree day. We might hit it 1 or 2 days a year, but it still has to be able to handle that. So on a 5-degree day, I have to maintain 68 degrees inside at an elevation of 3 foot above the floor. Explosion control is talked about in section 310, but it actually references you to section 911 of the International Fire Code. 311 talks about smoke and heat vents, and again, it references you to the International Fire Code. Section 312 talks about heating and load calculations. Very specifically mentions ASHRAE, American Society of Refrigeration, Air Conditioning Engineers. It talks about their books and their requirements. Chapter 3 of International Energy Conservation Code is also discussed. So Chapter 3 of this code book covers a wide variety of things, and you will find that everything after this, the following chapters, will build upon this material in Chapter 3. So take a few minutes, go back through the code book, then go do your chapter questions, which you'll find in the assignment tab, and then post your discussion questions. When you're all done and when your instructor tells you, go ahead and take your end of chapter quiz when it's available.